Today on the John Eckerberg Show, where did we come from? How did we get here? What brought us into existence? In most high schools and colleges, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution is presented as an established fact of science rather than a theory. But today, many leading scientists in their peer-reviewed literature are rejecting Darwin's theory for many reasons. One of the most important being the Kambriyen explosion of animals, where complex, fully formed animals suddenly just appeared in the fossil record, with no prior ancestors before them. Why do some scientists believe that these animals present compelling evidence of an all-powerful designing intelligence in the history of life? My guest today is Dr. Stephen Meyer, who received his PhD in the philosophy of science from Cambridge University, as the author of the best-selling book, Darwin's Doubt. We invite you to join us. Welcome to our program. I'm John Eckerberg. Thanks for joining me. Our topic is, why are many scientists today rejecting the standard textbook theory of evolution known as neo-Darwinism? And where did the problems with the contemporary evolutionary theory begin? Dr. Meyer, we're glad that you're here. And today I want to begin with a clip from Illustra Media's beautiful documentary movie, Darwin's Dilemma, which gives a quick summary of what scientists have found in the fossil record over the last 150 years. I want you to listen.
During the past 150 years, fossil hunters have searched the Earth for the many transitional links Darwin's theory requires.
If I sent you on a treasure hunt and said, what I really want is this, you're going to go out and look for this, whatever it happens to be. Well, if you come at the fossil record with a Darwinian expectation of an abundance of transitionals, that's what's going to get you a professorship. You find those transitional forms. So all over the world, in countless outcrops, people have been looking for those forms that would capture the major transitions in the history of life.
This search has extended from the walls of the Grand Canyon to the shores of the Irish Sea. And as countless specimens have been excavated, one question endures. How complete is the Kambriyen fossil record?
I think the Kambriyen fossil record is surprisingly complete. I think it may be more complete than we realise. The reason for that is, for instance, if you look at the stratigraphy of the world, if I go and collect Cambrian rocks in Wales and find certain fossils, if I then go to China, I don't find the same species, but I find the same sorts of fossils. If I go into Carboniferous rocks, I go to Canada, they're the same as what I find in this country. So there is a clear set of faunas and floras which take us through geological time. The overall framework is falling into position.
There's no question that if you dig and sample more, you're going to find new kinds of fossils. But generally speaking, the fossils that we find fall into groups that we already knew about. When you see that, what I think nature is telling you is you've got a pretty good sample of the history of life on Earth. The groups that you already had established are the ones that capture the new fossils.
Now, Stephen, throughout this series, we've been talking about the mystery of the Precambrian ancestral fossils. And I want you to start by putting the little clip that we saw in context. What is the Kambriyen explosion exactly? And then you say, besides the fossils, there's another problem as well. I want you to explain that.
Right. Well, we have been talking about the Kambriyen explosion and a doubt that Darwin had about his own theory, not whether the theory was true. He was convinced it was, but he was concerned that his theory couldn't explain all the evidence, including a key piece of evidence about the origin of animal life on Earth, and that is what the Kambriyen explosion is all about. It's the sudden appearance or the abrupt appearance in the fossil record of most of the major groups of animals that have ever existed on Earth. If the fossil record is incomplete, significantly incomplete, then we could say, well, those missing ancestral fossils in the Precambrian rocks that we expect to be there given Darwin's theory maybe just haven't been found yet. That was something that Darwin thought as was a possibility to explain this abrupt appearance of fossils in the Cambrian period. He thought, well, maybe the missing ones in the lower Precambrian layers are only missing from our point of view, that we just haven't found them yet. We haven't looked hard enough. But 155 some odd years later, that's not a very plausible explanation, especially as several of the scientists were saying in the previous clip, especially since the pattern of fossilization that we find just keeps getting reinforced by new fossils. And the new fossil finds have also made our awareness of just how explosive the Cambrian event was. What we've learned is the Cambrian event is even more explosive than Darwin realized, because there are many new forms of life that have emerged, but they too are lacking discernible ancestors in the lower Precambrian strata. So the fossil evidence has created a big mystery. I call that in my book the mystery of the missing fossils. But as you allude to, there's also a second and deeper mystery, and that is the mystery of how the evolutionary process could have built these animals. It's an engineering problem. As we've learned more about what it takes to build an animal, what's inside cells, and how animals develop, that mystery has become much more acute. We've learned, for example, in the second half of the 20th century, that digital information stored in DNA is critical to building the proteins that keep cells and animals alive. So when you get a big explosion of new animal form in the fossil record, you're really looking at evidence of a big explosion of information, of digital code, literally. And so that raises a big question: where does that come from? On top of that, when we're looking at an animal, we're looking at something like a body architecture, what scientists call a body plan, which is a unique arrangement of body parts and tissues. So DNA is really necessary to build the small components called proteins that are inside cells that keep cells and animals alive. But we've now learned that there are additional levels of assembly instructions necessary to organize cells into tissues, and tissues into organs, and the organs and tissues into these larger body architectures. And that has raised a second and even more profound question about where these body plans come from and how they would have been built by the evolutionary process.
All right. In this next clip, we're going to show them a little bit about what you're talking about. And folks, I want you to watch this. This talks about the origin of body plans. This is fascinating. Watch this.
In 1831, 3 months after his first exposure to Cambrian geology, young Charles Darwin embarked on an expedition that would influence the development of his theory of evolution. As naturalist aboard the HMS Beagle, Darwin sailed to the Galapagos Islands, 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. For 5 weeks, Darwin explored this remote island chain, home to an extraordinary assembly of animals. Here, the idea for his tree of life was planted. According to Darwin, as one form of life morphed into another, new species arose. And as they gradually branched apart, larger differences in form emerged. Eventually, evolution produced an even greater level of disparity, the distinct body plans of new phyla.
Phyla are abstract categories that bring together basic features that unite large groups of animals. So you can think about a phylum as a group of organisms that all share a basic architecture.
Based on the body plan of the animal, we divide animals into these major groups. There's vertebrates, the backbone and soft bodies outside the bone structure. There's arthropods, which have a hard skeleton on the outside and a soft body on the inside. These are the insects and the crabs. There's the echinoderms, which are the sea urchins and starfish.
Sea stars are different from jellyfish, different from worms, and different from crabs and lobsters. So each group has their unique features to make them very different from the next group.
The stability of these forms in the animals that exemplify the distinct phyla contradict Darwin's vision of an interconnected tree of life.
The phyla don't blend imperceptibly one into another. Arthropods, for example, didn't evolve from chordates. Mollusks aren't the offspring of sponges. Instead, a phylum is in effect as different as it can be from another phylum. So, how did these differences arise? If one reads The Origin of Species, it's clear that Darwin's caught in a bind.
Stephen, you know, when you look at the world, there's a difference between a giraffe, an elephant, and a cockroach, okay? And what you're saying is it took information to make those differences, a lot of different information. When you go back to the pattern of appearance of animal body plans, even in the Kambriyen fossils, they challenge the Darwinian picture of the history of life. Explain a little bit more.
Well, there's really two issues. There's what is the mechanism or cause by which these complex differences in anatomy and body plan organization would have arisen? And can natural selection and random mutations generate the different kinds of information necessary to build those animals? And then secondly, does the pattern of appearance of these differences in the fossil record match what Charles Darwin expected? On a Darwinian view of things, you would expect the large differences in form, the differences that we would use to distinguish one body plan from another or one phylum from another. We would expect those large differences in form to accumulate as the result of a series of smaller incremental variations over time. And so you get what you would expect to see would be what's called a bottom-up pattern, which is expressed in the tree of life idea, that little tiny differences and variations as one form morphs into a slightly different form would accumulate, and then eventually you would have the kind of large-scale differences we see today that define, for example, the difference between an arthropod with a hard exoskeleton and soft body parts on the inside and a chordate, which has the opposite organization and body logic, which is it has soft parts on the outside and a hard notochord or vertebrate on the inside. Those are big differences, but the idea is that those differences would have emerged through a series of small steps. And what we see in the fossil record instead is that tree of life in effect turned upside down. We have the big differences in form emerging right from the beginning, with no evidence of this small incremental gradual change over time in which the large differences are built up gradually. So instead of a bottom-up pattern, we have what the paleontologists are calling a top-down pattern, where you have major differences emerging right from the beginning, and then small-scale variation occurring within some kind of limits, kind of variations on those original themes or those original body plan designs. So it's a very striking contrast, again, between Darwinian theory and what we actually see in the fossil record.
Yeah, how many of the phyla, the big ones, that just appear in the Kambriyen explosion?
Well, there are, depending on whom you ask, there are about 36 phyla. It's a pretty good estimate of the total number of distinct body plans in the animal kingdom. And about 27 of those have been fossilized. And of the 27 fossilized forms, 20 first appear in the Kambriyen. There are roughly three that occur a little bit earlier in the late pre-Kambriyen, but they also appear very abruptly. So you have a really striking pattern of discontinuity and abrupt appearance, which is, again, quite contrary to what you'd expect on a Darwinian picture of the history of life.
All right, folks, I mean, this is astonishing stuff, and I hope that you're remembering what he's saying, and this next clip's going to explain it a little bit further, so watch.
The sudden appearance of animal body plans deepens the Kambriyen mystery in another way. The Darwinian model predicts that as new biological forms evolved, simple to complex, they developed gradually from the smallest differences in classification to the largest, or from the bottom up.
Darwin's idea was that given enough time, evolution would lead to new species, new families, orders, and eventually phyla. And only after millions and millions of generations do you end up with, the several dozen phyla that we see around us nowadays. That would be the bottom-up pattern predicted by Darwin's theory.
Now, the other picture is top-down. The top-down picture says the primary differences are original. They're there right at the start. When you find mollusks in the fossil record, or the arthropods, boom, there they are, with the major differences present right at the beginning. So the upper level architecture is top-down, present right there.
Stephen, this is a tremendous clip, and it's an important clip, and it raises the issue of the pattern of appearance of body plans in the fossil record. What issues does this bring forth?
The standard answer in contemporary evolutionary theory is that natural selection acts on random mutations to generate new variations in form and structure that eventually accumulate to become major differences that we would demarcate as separate body plans.
That's the theory.
That's the theory. But there's several problems that have emerged with that explanation, and they are very fundamental and profound problems. In the mid-1980s, there were a couple of scientists, Christian Nusslein-Volhard and Eric Wieschaus, who won the Nobel Prize for some important work that they were doing, mapping the genome of the hapless fruit fly.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting story.
And what Nusslein-Volhard and Wieschaus did was they effectively reverse engineered the genome of the fruit fly. They would knock out particular genes, and then they would see what would develop or what wouldn't develop. So they'd knock out a particular gene, and they'd find that would affect eye function or cause it to diminish. Or they'd knock out another gene, and would find that it would deform the wing or something. So they were able to figure out which parts of the genome affected the different parts of the animal as it developed. And for this work, they got a Nobel Prize. It was a fantastic piece of scientific investigation. In addition to mapping the fruit fly genome, these two scientists made a discovery that has profound implications for evolutionary theory. They found that if the mutations they induced were induced early in the development of the embryo as it moved from embryonic form to adult form, that invariably the development of the animal would shut down. And they called this the problem of embryonic lethals, because in fact the developing fruit fly would just die if there were mutations induced early in the development of the animal. Now your viewers may remember from biology class that as embryos develop, they'll go through a pattern of cell division where there'll be the fertilized egg, it will divide into 2 cells, into 4, into 8, and so on, and eventually thousands of different cells. Now, if you wanted to build a new body plan, you would have to induce mutations early in the process. Because if the mutations occur very late in the development, they're only going to affect a small cluster of cells as the animal is developing through all these various divisions. So it's only the cells at the very beginning which can possibly affect the whole architecture of the animal itself. And yet these two German scientists found that inducing the mutations early always caused a termination of the pattern of development.
Which is kind of serious.
Which is really serious, because the very kind of mutations you need to develop a new body plan in the process of evolution are the very kind that we know always kill the animal. So the kind of mutations you need are early acting, body plan affecting mutations which are also beneficial, and they never occur. We get early acting, body plan affecting mutations, but they're never beneficial. They're always lethal. The kind we don't need, mutations that occur much later, that affect only a small cluster of cells, those may be beneficial, but they would never change a body plan. So there's a kind of a catch-22. The kind you need, you don't get. The kind you get, you don't need. And this is a big problem for the Kambriyen explosion.
I would say it's a real big problem.
Well, it's a problem for explaining the Kambriyen explosion, because the Kambriyen explosion is, after all, the event in which we get the origin of new body plans, and yet the Darwinian mechanism doesn't seem to be able to produce a change on that scale of innovation.
But that's not the only problem that you've found. What's another one?
Well, there's a related problem, and it's also emerged from studies in the field of developmental biology. There's a famous developmental biologist at the California Institute of Technology named Eric Davidson, And Davidson has mapped what he calls developmental gene regulatory networks. And I have a picture of one on the slide. And these are essentially integrated circuits or networks of genes and their protein products that are functioning like integrated circuits. And the way to understand what they do is this. You have a gene that will direct the construction of a protein, which is actually a signaling molecule. And that protein will then either turn on or turn off the expression of other genes. And those genes will also produce still other signaling molecules, will turn on or turn off still other genes. And there's this whole vast network of genes and their protein products that are linked together that have the effect of controlling how cells develop and differentiate from each other during the pattern of animal development. So to build an animal, you need these developmental gene regulatory networks, or these integrated circuits of genes and their gene products. Now, Davidson has discovered something else that's very important about these developmental gene regulatory networks, and that is you can't change them very much, or else animal development shuts down. He says you can't perturb them, or else you again get the problem of lethals. So that raises a profound question for evolution, or for evolutionary theory. Because to build a new animal body plan, to build a body plan, we know we need these gene regulatory networks, which implies that to build a new animal body plan, you would need one gene regulatory network to evolve into another gene regulatory network. But we know experimentally the one thing that cannot happen is for these gene regulatory networks to change very much. So it really raises the question of how you would ever get a new body plan to emerge from an older body plan at all. How would you make that transformation when the very thing you need to transform cannot be changed, namely these gene regulatory networks?
Yeah, and looking at your picture of what a gene regulatory network looks like, it's awfully complicated. I would think what raises the question, too, where did the whole thing come from in the first place?
Well, it's not just complicated. There's an integrated complexity here that's characteristic of circuitry. This is the kind of thing that engineers design. It looks like a motherboard or an integrated circuit. And so it also, I think, raises the question of design, and it does that for another reason as well, because gene regulatory networks are made of a vast network of genes. And each gene contains digital code. And that gets back to this really fundamental question that we've been talking about in previous episodes, is where does all that information come from? We know that we need additional layers of information beyond what's in the DNA, but these gene regulatory networks contain genetic information in a digital form stored in DNA, and that's a big problem too. So at every level we have difficulties that the modern neo-Darwinian synthesis has just been unable to solve. It does not provide an explanation for the origin of the genetic information. It doesn't provide an explanation for the origin of the higher level epigenetic information, and mutations do not give a good explanation for the origin of body plans. We don't get early acting developmental mutations that are beneficial, and yet we need those kind. And we can't perturb these gene regulatory networks, and yet we know that to build a new animal body plan, you would need to generate new developmental gene regulatory networks. So there are multiple problems confronting the neo-Darwinian mechanism, and yet that is still the standard mechanism that is taught and proposed as the explanation for the origin of the kind of large-scale change that we see arising in the fossil record in the history of life in events such as the Kambriyen explosion.
Yeah, I mean, it raises the question, if, boom, you have all of these animals in the Kambriyen fossil record showing up, okay, and all of this stuff is basically there, where did it come from?
Where's the genetic information come from? Where does the higher level information come from? And how do you build a body plan? None of these problems have been answered by modern Darwinian theory, and so we clearly need a new theory.
You've gone to Cambridge, you got your PhD, and you have studied this topic for many years of your life, and next week we're going toward the answer. In 30 seconds, what are we going to tell the people next week about where it did come from?
Well, I have developed an alternative theory that I and my colleagues call the theory of intelligent design. And we think what we're seeing in living systems, when we're looking at code, at circuitry, at hierarchically organized information processing systems, are actually hallmarks of the activity of a designing intelligence in the history of life. And next week, I guess you're going to give me a chance to make my case.
Folks, you won't want to miss this. I hope that you'll join us then.
If you would like to have all of the information in our new series, The Case for Intelligent Design, Charles Darwin admitted he did not know how the first cell came into existence. But today, molecular biologists have discovered that the human cell is not simple, but complex beyond belief. In the nucleus of each cell is the DNA molecule, which contains a storehouse of 3 billion characters of precise information in digital code. This digital code is crucial to the origin and function of all plants, animals, and humans. But where did this complex DNA code come from? And is an all-powerful, intelligent designer a better scientific explanation than Darwinism for the genetic information found in the DNA molecule? The 4 television programs in this series are also available on DVD for a gift of $49. Then our second series is entitled The Mystery of the Missing Fossils, featuring Dr. Stephen Meyer. All 4 half-hour television programs are available on DVD for a gift of $49. You will see the astonishing evidence that has led scientists to conclude that fully developed, complex animals suddenly appeared on Earth during the Kambriyen age and had no prior ancestors, and why this fossil evidence goes directly against Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. Why an all-powerful, intelligent designer is a better scientific explanation than Darwinism for the sudden appearance of fully formed animals in the fossil record. The 4 important programs in this series are available on DVD for a gift of $49. And then third, we are making available the documentary movie Darwin's Dilemma, which will transport you by state-of-the-art computer animation back in time to one of the great mysteries in the history of life, the geologically sudden appearance of dozens of major complex animal types in the fossil record without any trace of the gradual transition steps. You will learn of the vast intelligence God used in meticulously creating and designing the first animals. This documentary movie is available on DVD for a gift of $30. And finally, if you wish to order all 3 of these items together, that is both television series plus the documentary movie Darwin's Dilemma, they are available together in a special package for only $100. And to order now, you may call 1-800-805-3030. That's 1-800-805-3030. Or you may order these programs now at our website at jashow.org. To learn how to start a relationship with Jesus Christ, go to our website at jashow.org and click on Pray to accept Jesus Christ as your Savior.